08:59 a.m. The glass door of the Sterling Financial Bank branch, located in the heart of Manhattan, opened gently as Donovan Hayes stepped in. A fresh spring breeze followed his footsteps, silently flowing into the luxurious space where the marble floors reflected the early sunlight. The sparkling crystal chandelier hanging from the high ceiling reflected each ray of light like diamonds rolling across the stone surface. Donovan dressed casually, a light blue shirt, neatly pressed khaki pants, and clean white sneakers. No silk tie, expensive suit, or Rolex watch. Just an ordinary black man coming in to conduct personal business. No one would guess that this man was the founder of this banking system, from a small office in Brooklyn to the lavish branch here. But this morning, he wasn't here as the CEO. He wasn't here to give a speech or review the quarterly reports. He was making a withdrawal, $15,000 from his account. He stood quietly in the waiting area, his sharp eyes observing the line of people ahead. Everything operated as expected. Employees in uniform suits moved swiftly, the regular hum of the money-counting machine, mixed with the ringing bell every time a counter became free. At one of the counters, a middle-aged white man, dressed in a neat gray coat, had just received a stack of cash. Donovan glanced at the transaction receipt in the man's hand. $20,000. No one checked his ID. No questions. No verification. No record. Just a polite smile, a few words wishing him a good day. And he walked out as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Donovan furrowed his brow lightly, not out of surprise, but out of confirmation. Confirmation that even in the bank he founded, the thing he had always feared still existed. Discrimination disguised as politeness and process. He said nothing. I took a deep breath, pushed the thought aside, and walked up to the nearest counter, where a blonde employee with a name tag reading Rachel Monroe was arranging paperwork. When their eyes met, everything began to change. Donovan smiled faintly and nodded as he stood in front of the counter. But Rachel Monroe, the woman with neatly styled blonde hair and a navy blue suit, didn't return the smile. She glanced at him half-heartedly, then immediately lowered her gaze to the drawer, pulling out a form. No greeting. No, good morning. No, how can I help you? Just a dry voice. Fill this out. Donovan hesitated for a moment. The way she pushed the form toward him, along with the pen and her cold gaze, made him acutely aware that he was being categorized. Not as a regular customer, not as a founder, but as a stranger needing to be checked. He didn't react. He took the form and filled in the necessary details: name, account number, and withdrawal amount, $15,000. Along with the form, he pushed his identification, a clear driver's license with his name and photo, toward Rachel. She glanced at the amount, but didn't even look at the ID. A beat later, she pushed everything back toward him. We can't process this transaction. Her voice was as sharp as a paper cutter. Donovan raised an eyebrow. I'm sorry. The amount is too large. The bank doesn't process cash withdrawals like this. If you need, you can transfer the money. Donovan pointed to the door, where the white customer had just received $20,000 a few minutes earlier. He just received cash. Right here. No form to fill out, no verification. Rachel slightly curled her lips, a thin smile tinged with discomfort. That case was different. Donovan kept his voice calm, but his eyes sharpened. Different how Rachel didn't respond. But her gaze flicked toward the end of the room, toward a small glass office where the branch manager, Mrs. Denise Harper, stood observing. Donovan followed her gaze. They immediately understood what was happening and who was sending the signal from the shadows. Rachel straightened up her eyes, becoming more resolute thanks to the almost imperceptible nod from Mrs. Harper. Donovan silently exhaled, his hand subtly tightening into a fist under the counter. The script was familiar. A black man enters with a legitimate request. A cold employee pushes him to the margins. a manager watches in silence, and someone who is always ready to appear to solve the problem. The problem was his very presence. But this time, Donovan wasn't backing down. He spoke slowly but clearly. I don't want to transfer the money. I don't want to schedule anything. I want to withdraw my money. My money. And you are refusing to process a legal transaction for no reason other than how I look. Rachel exhaled sharply. I'll call the manager. I hope she's ready. And then, like every time, the cycle of subtle discrimination began to turn. Except this time, it was aimed at the only person with the power to stop the whole machine in its tracks. The glass door to the manager's office opened. Footsteps echoed against the marble floor, like rhythmic hammers tapping on the ground. In her early 40s, with a slender build, fair complexion, and carefully straightened brown hair, Denise Harper stepped out with the demeanor of someone who had dealt with hundreds of problems in her life. She didn't wear an angry expression. On the contrary, her smile was gentle and polite, the kind of smile high-level individuals use to soothe crowds. But inside, it was as cold as ice. "Good morning, sir," Denise said, standing beside Rachel. "I'm the branch manager. It seems we're having a small misunderstanding here." Donovan turned to face her, his eyes fixed. "I just want to withdraw cash from my account. No loans, no credit cards, no unusual transaction. But I'm being denied." Denise tilted her head slightly as though considering, "We have a few internal security policies for large cash withdrawals. My staff is just following procedure." Donovan squinted. "I just saw a white gentleman withdraw more money than me. No questions asked." Denise didn't flinch, but her voice slowed a beat. "Each customer has a different risk profile." Donovan tilted his head back slightly, a faint smile on his lips. Perfect answer to cover up racial bias. He lowered his voice. "And I'm the founder of this branch." Denise froze for a split second. Her eyes twitched momentarily, just enough for Donovan to realize he had struck the right nerve. "Excuse me?" she asked again, her voice taking on an entirely different tone. "Donovan Reed, the one who built Bennett Crown Bank, the one behind the operating license and all the internal security policies you mentioned." A ripple of shock spread across the lobby, from the staff eavesdropping behind the counters to the few customers in mid-transaction. Everyone started looking toward him, no longer indifferent, but surprised, shocked, and embarrassed. Rachel turned pale. Denise quickly glanced at her, silently questioning why she had let things go this far. Denise composed herself. "If this is indeed the case, I think there's been a serious misunderstanding. We sincerely apologize for your unprofessional experience at this branch." Donovan nodded slightly. "The only misunderstanding here is that you think I don't belong here." The moment the words left his mouth, the atmosphere fell silent. Even Elliot, the tall security guard standing near the door, hesitated, his gaze uncertain as he looked at his manager. Denise clenched her fist, then took out her phone from her jacket pocket. "I'll immediately contact the executive office to clarify your identity and request." "No need," Donovan interrupted. "They're on their way here. The CEO, Mr. Richard Langford, will be here in 10 minutes. And by then, I expect everything happening here to be fully witnessed." Denise's face shifted from pale to ghostly. Rachel lowered her head, staring at the counter, as though she wanted to disappear. At that moment, an elderly white woman carrying a coach bag and standing near the customer service area hesitantly spoke up. "I saw everything, and I need to testify if necessary." The entire room fell silent. Donovan turned to her and nodded. "Thank you. Today I need the truth to be seen. Not just by me, but by everyone who has ever been treated as a threat, simply because of the color of their skin." A ripple of change was beginning to stir. What started as an ordinary transaction was now revealing the truth, and this time, it would not be buried in silence. At precisely 9:28 a.m., a sleek black Cadillac Escalade quietly rolled up to the curb in front of the bank. No sirens, no fanfare. But when the door opened and Richard Langford, the CEO of Bennett Crown Bank, stepped out, the entire space seemed to hold its breath for a beat. Richard, a white man in his 60s with silver hair and a dark gray suit, needed no introduction. With a glance, he drew every gaze in the bank lobby like a magnet. He didn't greet the receptionist. He didn't look around. He walked straight into the bank, the heavy sound of his leather shoes ringing against the shiny marble floor. Donovan stood up when he saw Richard. The two men, one the founding figure, the other the present face of the corporation, locked eyes across the atmosphere thick with tension. Donovan. Richard spoke first, his voice husky and deep. "I got the call, and after hearing what I did, I came straight over." Denise rushed forward. "Mr. Langford, it seems there's been a bit of a misunderstanding." Silence. Denise. For the first time in 10 years of working under Richard, she was cut off in front of all the staff and customers, and it left her as pale as a statue. Richard turned to Donovan. "You don't need to explain yourself. I need to hear from my staff and those who witnessed." Donovan nodded toward the older woman, Mrs. Helen Marston, who had seen the entire incident. She stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly, but her voice clear. "I was behind Mr. Donovan when he was mistreated. The employee named Rachel didn't ask him anything. I just pushed the papers back at him. But just minutes earlier, I saw a white man withdraw $20,000 without being asked a thing." Richard nodded, his gaze as sharp as a scalpel. "Thank you, Mrs. Marston. Your testimony is crucial." Denise interjected, trying to maintain her calm. "We were just following internal security procedures. So what exactly are these procedures?" Richard asked, his voice low but authoritative. "Is there a requirement for additional verification for all customers withdrawing cash over $10,000? Denise gulped. "No, sir. Only when we detect something unusual. So the only unusual thing this morning is the customer's skin color." Richard looked her straight in the eyes. Or is it that he wasn't wearing an expensive suit and wasn't driving a sports car? The silence in the bank lobby was as heavy as stone. Amy's face turned pale. Rachel shrank behind the counter, her hands clenched and shaking. Richard slowly turned to face all the employees who were holding their breath in silence. "This branch is named after the founder, Donovan Reed. He was a man who laid the foundation for this place with integrity, intellect, and his very blood to build a banking system that doesn't discriminate. And today, he was dragged out of his branch like a criminal." A young employee, an Asian man named Eric, bowed his head in shame. A Latin American customer quietly nodded her hand, gripping her purse tightly. "Your silence is part of the problem." Richard continued, his voice deep but firm. "We won't fix anything if everyone chooses to stand by while wrongdoings occur before our eyes." He turned to Denise one last time. "From this moment forward, you are suspended. An independent investigation will be opened." Denise didn't resist. She turned, walking slowly and heavily. Ethan, the white security guard who had pushed Donovan, lowered his gaze to the floor. Jamal, the black security guard standing outside, stood straight, and Richard said a single short sentence: "You should be inside." Jamal stepped through the glass door for the first time that day, not to guard anyone else, but to be seen. Donovan still hadn't spoken, but his eyes said everything. The silent battle he and people like him had endured for years had just been exposed in broad daylight. After Denise left in silence, Richard Langford gestured to all the staff in the bank lobby. "All transactions stop. I need a meeting room and a projector. Now." The atmosphere was electric. The staff immediately obeyed, though they still didn't understand what was happening. Within 5 minutes, A small meeting room was prepared. Donovan entered first, followed by Richard and a few senior employees. Rachel, the one who had turned away Donovan, was ordered to attend. Then Richard turned to Jamal, the black security guard standing by the door. "You come with us. I think you have something to say." Jamal blinked, surprised. It had been long since he had seen a senior executive willing to hear from a security guard. Inside the meeting room, the screen of truth. The projector lit up, and Richard plugged in his USB. A detailed report from the internal transaction system appeared on the screen. A list of cash withdrawals over $10,000 in the last 30 days. A small column on the right showed additional verification required, all left blank. All, except one name, Donovan Reed. "This is our system," Richard said, his voice even. "It records every approval request. It reports every exception. And only one person on this list was flagged." All eyes turned to Rachel now, looking down, her lips trembling. I thought..." "Thought what?" Richard interrupted. "Thought that a black man in casual clothes withdrawing $15,000 was surely more suspicious than a white man in a blazer taking $20,000 just minutes earlier." Rachel lowered her head without answering. Another employee, an Asian American named Eric, timidly spoke up. "Excuse me, but this isn't the first time. I've seen her turn down a Hispanic customer, and even called security on an elderly black man just because he spoke English with an accent." The room went still. Richard turned to Rachel. "I don't care for an apology if it only comes after being exposed. I care about the habits and thinking behind that behavior." Donovan then spoke, his voice deep but clear. "I don't need anyone to be scapegoated. I need this system to stop operating like there are two doors. One for the trusted, and one for those suspected the moment they walk in." A voice no longer hidden. Jamal slowly stood up. He took a small notebook from his jacket pocket, the edges worn from about 3 months of use. "I've been keeping track of similar cases, dates, times, and descriptions of customers. Not to sue, but to remind myself if I'm being paranoid." Richard gestured for him to continue. "I've seen white customers withdraw $30,000 without anyone asking. But when it's a black or brown person, the questions always start with the tone, 'Are you sure? Where is this money from?'" Jamal flipped to a page. "Last month, a young black man was asked to verify 3 times. When he said his father was a congressman, everything went silent. A female employee began to cry. Another bowed her head, embarrassed." The reveal from within. Richard turned off the projector. He turned back to Donovan. "I know you don't need a show of retaliation, but this can't quietly disappear." Donovan nodded. "I want this to become a precedent, a principle to be rewritten." Richard smiled for the first time that day. "Then we'll begin rewriting." He stood up, looking around the room. "From today, the Chicago branch will hold mandatory internal bias training for all staff. As for Rachel, you are suspended while we review all transaction behavior over the past 6 months." He walked over to Jamal, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You will be transferred to the regional security oversight position. We need people who don't just see things, but are willing to remember and face them." After the meeting, Donovan stepped out of the room with calm, measured steps, but his emotions were still a storm inside. Not because of the humiliation earlier. He was used to being doubted in spaces where his skin color was the only reason people grew cautious, but because for the first time, the truth hadn't been buried. Jamal walked beside him, down the hallway leading outside. Neither said a word. But it was precisely that silence that carried weight. One man who had once been treated as invisible. One man who had kept a notebook recording each time people like him were mistreated, was now being trusted. "I don't think Mr. Langford will let this slide," Jamal said quietly. "He's not like the others." Donovan nodded. No, but the system still is. Behind the glass door, the power player still sits, while Donovan and Jamal exited inside the branch manager's office. Victoria Sanders, recently suspended, sat motionless. The door was closed, but murmurs still buzzed on the other side. In the reflection of the glass door, she saw her face no longer bearing its usual aura of authority. But one thing hadn't changed: the instinct to deflect blame. She pulled out her phone and typed a quick message. Suspended. Need. Legal. Sent to Jeremy Ross, the corporate internal legal counsel, who had helped many managers avoid termination using backdoor maneuvers. The truth spreads in the shadows. At noon, in a small cafe across from the bank, Bailey Jameson, a young reporter for the Chicago Tribune, was scrolling through Twitter. A short clip posted by the account @RealJusticeFeed showing Donovan being dragged out had surfaced just 2 hours earlier and already amassed over 80,000 views. She tapped to play it. Her eyes froze as she recognized that's Donovan Reed, the youngest CEO of the Reed-Langford Financial Group. Without waiting another second, she picked up her phone and called her editor. I need to write this. Now. And I need direct access to the main subject, the runaway with the thin smile. In Chicago, Rachel Myers, the suspended teller, was packing her personal items into an old tote bag. Her face was cold as stone, but her hands trembled. A coworker whispered, "He's the CEO. And you kicked him out of his bank." Rachel didn't reply. But in her mind, there was no remorse, only fear. Not fear of what she had done, but of being caught. She still believed if he hadn't been the CEO, then what was wrong with it? That painful truth was the root of the entire problem. The chain reaction. That afternoon, internal emails from Langford corporate headquarters were dispatched to every branch nationwide. Subject: emergency anti-discrimination policy for cash transactions. Effective immediately. Directive: all tellers and managers must attend unconscious bias training within 7 days. No one dared to object, and among those who received the email, a low-level employee at the Phoenix branch. A Native American man sat quietly staring at the screen, a faint smile curling on his lips. Finally, someone dared to do what's right. The midnight call. That evening, Donovan received a video call from Elijah Reed, the company's co-founder, and the man Donovan saw as a father figure. "They sent me the report," Elijah said. "Are you okay?" Donovan looked into the screen. The entire day flashed before his eyes, from the invisible slap called suspicion to the silent applause of those once too afraid to speak. "I'm okay. But this is just the beginning." Elijah paused, then said, "Then go all the way. If you were thrown out of the very place you helped build, go back and clean out every stain that's been hidden." Donovan nodded. "I'll do more than that." 8:00 a.m. The next morning, outside the South Loop branch of the bank in Chicago, a quiet group of people had gathered outside the bank's glass doors where Donovan Reed had been thrown out the day before. They carried no banners, no loudspeakers, no shouted slogans, but each held a simple sign: "I could be Donovan." Profiling has a price. We see you now. The movement was led by Camille Watson, a civil rights attorney and former classmate of Donovan's. She wore a charcoal hoodie, her face calm, but her eyes razor-sharp. After watching the viral video, Camille wrote a blog post overnight calling for change not just from the company Donovan owned, but across the entire national banking system. That blog post spread like wildfire, and now those who had once suffered in silence had shown up. Inside the bank, the masks start to fall. Inside the branch, the air was heavy, ready to explode. Amy Carlson, the teller who had refused to serve Donovan, sat trembling in front of her computer screen. Her fingers moved across the keyboard, but her mind was stuck on the razor-sharp glare from Mr. Carter the day before. Racial profiling, he had said. The phrase felt like an unspoken sentence already in effect. From the temporary branch manager's office, Camden Rhodes, a representative from the senior executive board, stepped out holding a folder and a list of employees marked for temporary suspension. Amy's name was first. She didn't cry. She stood still like a criminal, stripped of a once righteous mask. Above the escalator, a system begins to shift. On the upper floor at the Midwest Regional Operations Office, Donovan sat in a modest, tidy space far from the grandeur of the corporate headquarters. Across from him was Maya Tran, Regional HR Director. She was a Vietnamese American and a former ACLU staffer before transitioning into finance. "Are you ready to take on the entire system?" Maya asked. Her tone wasn't skeptical, just grounded. "I'm not taking it on," Donovan replied, eyes fixed on the strategic planning board. "I'm cleansing what I built with my own two hands." Maya nodded. "Then allow me to propose this." She pulled out a document titled Blacklight Initiative, a cultural reconstruction campaign to combat implicit bias. The content included deployment of customer sentinels, undercover monitors to document discriminatory behavior, tactical training for security guards and tellers, a confidential internal reporting system with authority to enforce action, shadow audits, anonymous transaction tests to evaluate internal fairness. Donovan skimmed it, then nodded. "Roll it out. Today." News breaks wide. The media goes silent no more. At the same time, in the Chicago Tribune newsroom, reporter Bailey Jameson had just finalized her article titled Black CEO Discriminated Against by His Own Bank, the Scandal Shaking the Financial World. It went live at 10:00 a.m., and within just 30 minutes, major outlets like CNN, MSNBC, and even BBC World News began reaching out for exclusive interviews. On Reddit, Twitter, and TikTok, hashtags like #Donovan Reed, #Banking Bias, and #IamDonovan soared to the top of the trending list. People who had once been denied loans, subjected to excessive ID checks, or refused service began sharing their stories. David Carter's office, where fates are decided. At the corporate headquarters in New York, David Carter, co-founder and mentor to Donovan, was directly meeting with the board of directors. "I've ordered a full restructuring of our employee evaluation system," he said. "Anyone involved in denying lawful service to customers will no longer have a place at this company." An older board member asked, "Are you certain this isn't just a temporary PR crisis?" David placed his phone on the table, turning the screen toward the group. A video played, Donovan's face shoved out through the glass doors, followed by a clip of him walking back in with a full security detail behind him. "This isn't a crisis. It's a warning. If we don't change, we'll lose an entire generation of customers." The room fell silent. 10:45 a.m. Emergency meeting at the South Loop Bank Branch, Chicago. The air in the third-floor conference room felt thick enough to slice. Inside were the people who orchestrated Silence branch manager Victoria Spencer Teller, Amy Carlson, and security guard Ethan Reynolds. All sat upright, as if the chairs beneath them were wired with electricity. In front of them stood Donovan Reed, the CEO, the man they humiliated just 24 hours earlier. "None of you were fired." "Yesterday," Donovan began, his voice calm to the point of being terrifying. "I want to hear from your mouths what happened yesterday." Victoria spoke first, still trying to maintain a professional facade. "We were acting by internal protocols for high-value transactions. There were certain factors that made the situation difficult." "What factors?" Donovan interrupted. Victoria hesitated. Unfamiliar appearance. The demeanor was confident. "Confidence is a threat now?" Donovan asked, voice low and rumbling like an undertow. "Or is it because I wasn't wearing a suit and I wasn't white?" "Amy." Carlson suddenly spoke, her voice trembling. I'm sorry. I truly didn't know who you were. Donovan looked her straight in the eye. The point is, if I were just an ordinary person, I still deserve to be treated with dignity like anyone else. I don't need to be a CEO to be treated like a human being. Ethan, the security guard who had violently pushed Donovan out, kept his head down. No one spoke to him. But in that moment, he understood the era of his untouchability had ended. 11:15 a.m. Temporary press conference room. A long wooden table had been hastily set up in the branch's lobby. The press was already there. Flashbulbs erupted in bursts. Donovan stepped forward with Camille Watson, the Blacklight Initiative's civil rights attorney and spokesperson. Beside them stood Jamal Brooks, the security guard, who had returned Donovan's ID the day before. Donovan began. Yesterday, a black man was viewed as a suspect inside the very bank he founded. But this story is not just about me. It's about a system where default prejudice drives actions instead of logic. He paused, eyes scanning the cameras. The Blacklight Initiative begins today. All 128 branches nationwide will undergo ethical evaluations, retraining, and random audits. And if anyone is found to have engaged in discrimination, even once, they will no longer have a place in this system. Applause erupted from outside the lobby. A group of African-American veterans, teachers, students, and everyday citizens had gathered to watch the live press conference on a large screen outside the bank. Reactions nationwide. On Twitter, talk show host Trevor King posted a viral tweet. A black CEO was thrown out of the bank he founded. Don't ask why people of color always have to prove their innocence. This is why. In Atlanta, rapper King Malik announced he would withdraw all his accounts from the bank unless Donovan received a public apology from the board of directors. Meanwhile, David Carter continued launching internal investigations at the New York headquarters. A list of branches with high rates of racial discrimination complaints was compiled. Donovan demanded the list be made public in 30 days. New roles for the courageous. At that exact moment, Donovan walked into the HR office and handed Jamal Brooks an official offer letter. Chief of Internal Security, entire banking network. Jamal was stunned into silence. I just did what was right. Donovan nodded. Exactly. And in a world full of people who look away, only those who stand firm deserve to lead. 12:30 p.m. Social media ignites. No one anticipated that the video recorded by Donovan Reed showing him being expelled from his bank would become the spark for a nationwide wave of outrage. Within just 2 hours of being posted on the Blacklight Initiative's X, formerly Twitter account, the hashtags #CheckHisID and #banking. While Black had shot into the top 3 U.S. trending topics, NBC News, CNN, The Root, and even financial outlets like Bloomberg began running synchronized headlines. Black CEO denied withdrawal and forcibly removed from the bank he founded. Donovan Reed, from founder to victim of the system he built. 1:15 p.m. The domino effect. At other Bennett Financial branches, employees began to worry. Several locations in Atlanta, Detroit, and Oakland reported visits from concerned community members asking, "Where's Donovan? Are the people who treated him like that still working here?" In Dallas, a middle-aged black customer brought a color-printed photo of Donovan. He placed it gently on the counter and said, "I'm not here to withdraw. I want to ensure everyone here knows the face of the man who built this place." 2:00 p.m. The banking system is under pressure. Even rival banks didn't stay silent. A spokesperson for First United Trust Bank posted on LinkedIn, "Today, we're not talking about profits. We're talking about dignity. What happened at Bennett Financial is a slap across the face of our entire industry." A small protest began forming outside the South Loop branch. Among the signs held up were, "If he built it, why can't he walk in it? You don't need a suit to deserve respect." 2:45 p.m. The board of directors responds. On the 52nd floor of the Empire Financial Building in New York, the board of directors at Bennett Financial held an emergency meeting. David Carter, who had previously handled the crisis, stood and addressed the room. "We no longer control the narrative. The public is rewriting it, and this time, they're writing in blood and fury." He presented an internal report. 14 branches had a high rate of racial discrimination complaints. Nearly 70 employees had previously been reprimanded for unethical conduct. Over 12,000 customers had initiated fund withdrawals within just 4 hours. A female board member sighed. "We're on the brink of losing the public's trust." The trust Donovan spent 20 years building. 3:30 p.m. Victoria Spencer suspended. An email was sent to all Bennett Financial HR departments. Victoria Spencer, branch manager of the South Loop location, has been suspended indefinitely, pending internal investigation. Amy Carlson and Ethan Reynolds will be temporarily reassigned to non-customer-facing roles. Jamal Brooks, now Chief of Internal Security, was granted full authority to audit internal operations within 30 days. He immediately formed an exceptional ethics committee focused on customer treatment, including frontline employees of color, those who had once experienced discrimination firsthand. 4:00 p.m. The return of Lisa Parker. At a nearby cafe, a woman sat quietly staring at her phone screen. Lisa Parker, a white customer, who had witnessed the entire incident the previous morning. When the barista asked if she wanted anything else, Lisa shook her head. A moment later, she opened her email app and began typing. "Dear Mr. Donovan Reed, I was present at the branch yesterday. I'm sorry I didn't do anything." She wrote, then erased. Wrote again. Finally, she hit send. "I can't change the past, but I will stand on the right side in the future. If you need a witness, I'm willing." 5:00 p.m. Internal security footage reviewed. In the third-floor security monitoring room of the South Loop branch, Jamal Brooks sat across from a large screen. Beside him was Kira Danvers, an audit specialist recently dispatched from headquarters. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. His eyes followed the footage extracted from the wide-angle camera at the teller counter that morning. Timestamp 9:03 a.m., 9:16 a.m. Donovan Reed stands patiently, showing no signs of agitation. Amy Carlson pushes the withdrawal form back without clear justification. Victoria Spencer steps out and points directly at Donovan. Ethan Reynolds approaches, grabs Donovan's arm, and forces him out the door. Kira typed a few notes into her laptop. No transaction violations. No threatening behavior from the customer. Severe procedural misconduct. 5:30 p.m. Call from the Chicago Human Rights Commission. At the executive office, Donovan received a video call from Marcia Duvall, chairwoman of the city's Human Rights Commission. "Mr. Reed, we'd like to propose a partnership with Bennett Financial to launch a mandatory anti-discrimination training program for the financial sector, not just your branch, but citywide." Donovan paused. "I don't want just to change one branch. I want to change this industry." Marcia smiled. "Then let your story be the beginning." 6:00 p.m. Board issues. Emergency directive. The full board of directors at Bennett Financial passed 2 emergency resolutions. 1. Mandatory retraining of all personnel involved in customer-facing transactions within 60 days. 2. Formation of an independent oversight committee on racial bias in banking services. Donovan was given authority to appoint the head of the new oversight committee. He didn't take long to call the first person who came to mind. Jamal Brooks. "I need you at the front line." 6:30 p.m. Private meeting at the temporary HQ. In a discreet meeting room, Donovan met again with David Carter, his longtime mentor and one of the most powerful figures in the company. David sipped his coffee, looking Donovan straight in the eye. "I know this story isn't new to you, but this time it wasn't just disrespect. You were erased from the very place you built." Donovan nodded. "I don't want revenge. I want to restructure how this industry sees black people. David smiled thoughtfully. You've had enough power. Now it's time to build your legacy. 7. Uzru p.m. Lisa Parker speaks out. On local television station, WCH9, a special segment titled Witness at the Counter aired. In the feature, Lisa Parker, the white customer who witnessed the incident, spoke out for the first time. I didn't do the wrong thing, but I also didn't do the right thing. I watched and I stayed silent. That was my greatest mistake. She spoke on camera, eyes glistening with tears. That man didn't yell. They didn't get aggressive. He just wasn't white. And somehow that was enough to be seen as a threat. Today, I choose to stand for justice. The interview ended with a quote, "Silence is complicity. I won't be silent anymore." 7:45 p.m. A young girl asks a question. In a small apartment in South Chicago, an 8-year-old girl turned to her mother after seeing Donovan's face on the TV screen. "Mom, why did they throw him out if he's the bank's boss?" The mother froze. Then her voice soft and tight, she replied, "Because some people don't care who he is. They only see his skin." The little girl stared at the screen. I hope one day I won't get kicked out of a place I own. 8:30 a.m. A leaked email thread. Suddenly, Bennett Financial's internal system was flooded with a leaked email chain. It revealed an exchange between Victoria Spencer, Amy Carlson, and Ethan Reynolds, dated just 2 weeks before the incident. Victoria: to be honest, people like them are always high risk. If we want to avoid attention, handle it discreetly. Amy: understood. If I see a potential subject, I'll deal with it like last time. Ethan: don't worry, I'll be at the door. The story spread like wildfire. Social media erupted. The hashtags, #check their emails, #banking, while black, and #Donovan Reed trended across X, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram within 3 hours. 11. Indra a.m. Emergency press conference at City Hall. Mayor Letitia Marlowe, the first black woman to hold the position in Chicago, stood at the podium flanked by dozens of reporters and civil rights activists. The incident at the South Loop branch is a slap in the face to the integrity of financial justice. No one should be treated like Mr. Donovan Reed was, especially not in a place he created. She announced plans to issue a citywide audit of all banks for discriminatory practices in collaboration with the Human Rights Commission and consumer protection groups for communities of color. 1:00 p.m. Police chief announces criminal investigation. In a separate briefing, Police Chief Raymond Ellis, long criticized for remaining silent in similar cases, stated, "We are working alongside the FBI to investigate potential collusion and systemic racial discrimination at this branch. All parties involved, including management and security staff, may face criminal charges." It marked the first time in Chicago's history that a racial discrimination case in banking had been escalated to a federal investigation. 2:00 p.m. A surprise moment at Northwestern University. At a keynote session on social justice in the main auditorium, a junior finance student raised her hand. "I'm Jamal Brooks's cousin, and I want to say, I'm proud of you." The room erupted in applause. The keynote speaker, a former black CEO, nodded solemnly. Sometimes you don't need the highest podium to lead. You need the courage not to turn away when the truth is trampled. 3:45 p.m. CNN airs a special feature. CNN's America's Hidden Walls aired a special segment titled "The Man They Tried to Erase from His Own Bank." Footage played Donovan being forced out the glass door. Jamal picked up his ID. Victoria was exposed before the entire staff. Then the anchor delivered a line that silenced millions. This isn't just the story of Donovan Reed. It's the story of countless others rejected by doors they helped build because they didn't have the preferred color. 4:15 p.m. A national apology. Evelyn Chambers, CEO of Bennett Holdings, appeared on national television. On behalf of the entire corporation, I extend a formal apology to Mr. Donovan Reed, the founder of the South Loop branch, for the serious and unacceptable acts of racial discrimination. She announced Donovan would be reinstated with complete executive control and that all individuals involved would be terminated. 5:00 p.m. A letter goes viral. Jamal Brooks posted on his page. Millions shared it. I'm a black man working security. I used to think silence was safety, but I forgot silence is complicity. Today I stood up, not because I wasn't afraid, but because I'm tired of living in fear. Part 12. No one invisible anymore. 8:00 a.m. Monday after the crisis. The doors of the South Loop branch opened like any other morning. But this wasn't just another day. The first customer was a black woman in her 80s, wearing a brown sweater and carrying a small purse. She stopped at the front desk and looked around. A young staff member approached, smiling politely. "How can I help you, ma'am?" She nodded slowly. "Today I came to be served in a place that is ours." Moments later, a line began to form. White, Black, Asian, Latino, many of whom had read Donovan's story. They weren't there to withdraw cash. They came to show faith in something larger: justice. 9:00 a.m. A new table in the lobby. Donovan Reed entered. Not the man pushed out like a suspect, but one wearing a modest gray blazer, his eyes calm and steady. In the main hall stood a new table, not an executive desk, but a community advisor's table. Donovan didn't return to his VIP office upstairs. He sat among the everyday customers, greeting them by name, listening to small stories about interest rates, loans, or sometimes just, "Thank you for standing up." 11:00 a.m. Jamal Brooks' appointment ceremony. In a live-streamed internal event, Jamal Brooks was officially appointed Senior Security Director, marking the first time in the company's history that a security guard had been promoted to a strategic leadership role. Jamal took the podium, eyes reddened. He spoke slowly. "I used to think I was just the guy who held the door. But today, I've learned holding the door doesn't mean closing it on justice. It means opening a way for what's right to enter." The room rose in applause. A few staff wiped tears from their eyes. And at the back, Donovan nodded, saying nothing, but his eyes said everything. 2:30 p.m. One final press conference. Donovan's CEO, Evelyn Chambers, and Mayor Letitia Marlowe faced the media. Under the camera lights, Donovan read a brief statement. "I'm not here to recount pain. I'm here to declare a beginning. We will launch the Financial Trust Restoration Fund to provide scholarships, financial education programs, and legal support to anyone denied for their skin or background." A journalist asked, "Do you believe the system will truly change?" Donovan replied, "A single brick can't build a foundation, but if everyone brings one, walls become strongholds." 5:00 p.m. The silent witness returns. Donovan stopped at a small bookstore near the bank on his way home. He saw Lisa Parker, the white woman, who had witnessed it all that day. She noticed him and walked over, her voice trembling. "I should have said something that day. I'm sorry." Donovan paused, then gently replied, "Silence is still speech, but it's never too late to change your tone." Lisa's eyes welled up. She nodded and took his hand. "Thank you for standing still, so we could all see we had bowed our heads." 8:00 p.m. Alone by the window. That night, Donovan sat alone by his apartment window. A cup of tea steamed softly in his hand, city lights reflecting in his glasses. On the table lay his bank card, now labeled Honor Tier. He opened his laptop and typed an email to every employee in the network. "I don't want you to serve me like I'm a CEO. Serve everyone as if they were, because everyone who walks through our doors carries worth that can't be measured by skin." He hit send, then smiled quietly. The next morning at the South Loop branch, a new bronze plaque was mounted on the wall. Donovan Reed, the man forgotten in the place he built, and who reminded us, no one should be forgotten again. Beneath it is a new slogan, Bennett Financial. We see you now.